Hello everybody, my name is Clare Lehane and I am the Commissioning Editor on Managerial Auditing Journal, and I just want to take a few minutes to talk very briefly about peer review in general and ethics as it applies to Emerald journals and Managerial Auditing Journal. So in the peer review process, you may come across these people when you submit your submission to the journal. There is an editor-in-chief who makes the final decisions and approvals on papers, and they are the primary editor. There may be an editorial assistant who looks at checklist tasks. There can be associate editors, section editors, and guest editors who are usually subject matter experts, and they do peer review on certain collections of papers. Emerald's policy on journals is a double anonymous peer review system. This means that when a paper is evaluated by an editor and judged suitable for the journal, then it is sent to two anonymous referees that do not know who the author is, and the author do not know who the referees are. So this is your generalized double-blind peer review process. As I mentioned earlier, a submission comes into the journal and the editor looks at it to see if it is in scope for the journal. If it is not, the paper is released back to the author. But if it is in scope, the editor will then select up to 3 reviewers and ask them to evaluate the manuscript against the set of criteria. They send their reviewer comments to the editor, and then the editor makes a decision based on those reviewer comments and their own reading of the paper. It could be accept, reject, or revise. If it's revised, the author gets a period of time to look at the reviewer's comments and to revise their paper according to those comments, and then resubmit it back to the editor, who then makes a decision on whether or not to accept, reject, or revise the paper again. In general, based on the volume of papers, reviewer availability, and reviewer response time, desk review can take 2 weeks, inviting reviewers can take 2 weeks, but sometimes more. Review process is 6 to 8 weeks, and editor assessment is 2 weeks. So peer reviewers play a key part in the following of assessing the merit of the work and the contributions it makes to the existing body of knowledge, checking statistics, methods, and sometimes correcting language issues, verifying that the conclusions are supported by the research, advising on whether earlier works may need to be considered, and comment on the relevance of the scope of the content and the originality of the content, and also comment on any ethical issues and possible research issues raised by the submission. Reviewers will then make recommendations, and the final decision whether or not the article is accepted is made by the editor. Peer reviewers have some responsibilities. They are expected to respond promptly to requests to review and to submit reviews within the time agreed. Reviewers' comments should be constructive, honest, and polite. If a reviewer cannot submit a review in time or does not have the knowledge to submit a review on a particular submission, reviewers can always just say no, and the editor will find another reviewer. Reviewers should declare the relationships and activities that might bias their evaluation of a manuscript and recuse themselves from the peer review process if a conflict exists. They are responsible for ensuring the manuscripts and the information they contain remain confidential, and they mustn't discuss the author's work or appropriate the author's idea before the manuscript is published. And reviewers who seek assistance from a trainee or colleague in the performance of review should acknowledge that these individual contributions in the written comments submitted to the editor. This is a handy checklist that was published in a journal in 2022, and they can help you decide whether or not you can go forward with a review. For example, you do need to check your biases. You can note any glaring omissions in citations such as foundational studies or recent advantages. Do critique the manuscript, but provide constructive and specific critiques. Acknowledge if there's parts of the manuscripts that you are not qualified to review. You should recommend specific addressable changes to analysis and interpretation. Evaluate organization flows and readability, and use comments to the editor to note if there's any major grammatical errors that make the manuscript difficult to read. In general, you shouldn't agree to review a manuscript if you cannot be objective. You shouldn't request the author to cite a paper on which you are an author, which can be classed as a self-citation. Criticize the authors or provide general comments without evidence. Ignore methods or statistics that you're unfamiliar, or recommend that there's extensive additional study beyond the scope of the work described. And you don't have to copy edit a manuscript if you are a reviewer on that particular manuscript. And just a final thought about AI in peer review. So articles, case studies and chapters that are submitted to Emerald for review are treated as confidential, meaning that if this material is shared with another person or uploaded to an AI tool or a large language model for assessment, this could violate the author's confidentiality as well as any proprietary or data privacy rights. This would also be the case for the peer review report itself if it's uploaded to an AI tool or large language model, because it may contain confidential or identifiable information pertinent to the article of the authors. And there's also an additional concern that the use of AI tools for peer review might lead to false or flawed or inaccurate results because of biases in these data sets of the models and the reliability of them to assess content. So as such, in order to maintain trust in the integrity of the peer review record, Emerald does not permit the use of AI tools or large language models to assist in the review, evaluation, or decision making of any part of an article. This is in line with Emerald's principles of peer review, because peer reviewers are responsible for the reviews they provide and are accountable for their accuracy, rigor, and validity. And this is also in line with COPE's position statement on AI tools. So now just a brief word on ethics. So as I mentioned COPE earlier, so COPE stands for the Committee on Publication Ethics, and COPE is dedicated to educate and support editors, publishers, and anyone involved in publication ethics. And the aim is to move to a place where ethical practices are the norm and are part of the publishing culture. Emerald's journals and editors act in accordance with the principles outlined by COPE. You can find all the guidelines on publicationethics.org. And there's lots of flowcharts and case studies that might be useful if you have an ethical issue. So we would recommend you have a look at those guidelines if you have time. In general, publishing best practice are: don't submit to more than one journal at a time. Wait until you have a decision from the first journal. Self-plagiarize or plagiarize. Forget authors or add non-authors. Fail to acknowledge prior researchers or research. Do disclose any conflicts of interest. Do respect the peer review process. Always have clear permission to publish interviews or case studies, which is usually something called consent to publish. And if in doubt, you can refer to the Committee on Publication Ethics. So I'm just going to look at two aspects of publication ethics that tend to crop up quite a bit. The first one is plagiarism. So plagiarism is basically using other people's ideas or intellectual property or work without their permission and or acknowledging their input. Plagiarism can look like the copying of a full article or large excerpts of a single text without sufficient referencing. It could be copying another author's results without referencing, or insufficient acknowledgement of a work, hypothesis, or methodology. In general, it is unethical to take credit for someone else's work, and it is standard academic and publishing practice to ensure other authors' works and ideas are fully referenced, be it verbatim or paraphrased. There are some consequences. There could be paper rejection if plagiarism is detected within the peer review process, or if the paper is published, it may be retracted. In some cases, there could be professional misconduct charges, or there could be the termination of employment in some cases. The second thing I want to talk about is authorships and disputes. In general, an author can be the writer of an article or a book or a document, but in academic publishing, more often than not, there is more than one author and more than one research team who could be considered authors. So an author is someone who makes a substantive effort and contribution to the paper and is able to speak about or defend the article's content in a public forum. Emerald subscribes to the authorship principles outlined by the International Council of Medical Journal Editors, and for that, an author must meet all of the following four criteria, which is made substantial contributions to the conception or design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of data for the work, and drafting the work or revising it critically for important intellectual content, and final approval of the version to be published, and an agreement to be accountable for all aspects of that work, in ensuring that questions related to the accuracy or integrity of any part of the work are appropriately investigated or resolved. Possible authorship disputes include things like exclusion of a contributor from a list of authors, which is ghost authorship, inclusion of a named person who has not contributed to the paper, which is called gift authorship, or does not want to be associated with the research, or the order of the authors published on the paper. In general, best practice is to agree that everybody who's listed on a paper is there and can defend the paper post-publication and in peer review, and that everybody's happy with the order of the authors before the paper goes into peer review. So in summary, you should only submit your research to Emerald Journals and to Managerial Auditing Journal if the research conducted has been conducted to the highest standards of rigor and integrity, that the work is original, the work has not been submitted elsewhere, it adheres to the requirements for generative AI, the authors listed on the work meet the authorship criteria, the work appropriately cites and references any previous publication, any conflicts of interest that may influence the handling of the work have been disclosed, the work does not include libelous or defamatory or unlawful statements, permission has been cleared or fought for any third-party material included, and proof of consent has been obtained for any named individuals or organisations. You can find all details of our research and public ethics on the hyperlink below. So I hope you found this useful, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. Thanks very much.